And we are now live on the interwebs, broadcasting to 0 viewers. But people will be able to check it out later because this will still be up on the YouTube channel. Anyhow, this is not actually media content, so forth, that we're putting out there as in a finished product. This is a discussion about the project, and we're putting it online to maintain transparency. This is the first of what I'm going to be doing a series of trying to talk to our patrons, the people who are supporting Important Cool, to get them more engaged with the project and see what their concerns are and what they're, where they hope we're going with things. In this case, the only patron who's actually joined us today is Mohammed Sami, who is a social media patron, because people can become supporters of Important Cool and get a say in the decision-making processes if they either donate money or donate a social media account to us. And Mohammed has done the latter, so he gets the same vote as someone who's donated up to $1,000, which is the maximum donation we'll take. So, anyhow, though it seems like Mohammed might even be considering joining in a more participatory way as a coder for us, but that's a conversation for later. Also joined by Johnny Pinheiro, who is our social media person and general roustabout troublemaker. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves a little bit? Johnny, tell me and Mohammed a bit about yourself and your involvement in RIC.
Hi, yeah, I'm basically I do like outreach, social media. I have a background in from the Occupy movement and a lot of solidarity with the Egyptian anti-coup, a lot of everything against the regime, more or less, and labor. So, long story short.
Mohammed, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I'm Mohammed. I'm currently a student, and my most prominent project is probably Cool Monitor, which monitors event data of anti-coup protests that are quite hard to monitor due to their decentralization and large amounts. Yeah, and I'm interested in open source software. I do a lot of contributions in the open source community. That's it.
When we sent this email out to our patrons, Mohammed replied that he'd be interested in this conversation and also in helping us out with the actually developing some of the software which we're interested in. Egypt has a lot to do with where the Important Cool project came from. My wife and I were both, my wife's Egyptian, and we were both journalists working in Egypt during the immediate post-Mubarak era. We left and came here, and then soon afterwards, there was, in the beginning of 2013, we came here to Ecuador, and so we watched with horror as the coup unfolded in Egypt. But something that I'd experienced when I was there is seeing people who published stuff about the Muslim Brotherhood and about the situation in Egypt, specifically about the Muslim Brotherhood government in Egypt, who clearly hadn't spoken to a person from the Brotherhood about the issue that they were writing on. They'd only spoken to one side of the conflict, and that led to terrible reporting which helped pave the way for this coup that set the democratically elected government up as a power-hungry dictatorship, and the military junta, which displaced brutally that democratically elected government, as somehow saving and continuing Egypt's democratic revolution. It was truly Orwellian to see, right? And at that stage, it felt too much like spitting into a storm to try and just keep arguing against this overwhelming, this, in the English language at least, this overwhelming consensus. But so, I guess the idea was then, don't hate the player, change the game. Try and change the rules by which journalism operates. make journalists accountable to show the working that they've done on a story. So any serious piece of reporting, not just a blog, not just a bulletin, which is such and such says such and such, and not just an opinion piece relying on facts that have already been researched, but something that, but real journalism should have accompanying it an account of the work that was done, and give people access to the source materials as much as possible that the journalists are working for. It's kind of like the WikiLeaks slogan is "full docs or it didn't happen," but how do you apply that to journalism, which is field journalism, which is going out in the streets and speaking to people and not just working from official sources and official documents. So the idea is, and that's what we've been trying to do. If people know the website, you'll see that there's we have these things called artifacts, which we have a few of, or one at least, at the end of every piece that we publish, and those are meant to. There's a gesture in this direction. But even what we tried to do to start with was artifacts. Keep copies of all the interviews you do, any documents that you use, and make pinboard links of the do redundancies of websites that you access, so that they're always there as source material. They can't be taken down and changed later. But just doing that manually has really slow. It's amazing how much time and effort goes into trying to get the format to work, trying to link these artifacts correctly with the stories and stuff. And the number one thing that I think the number one priority for us as an organization is to try and develop some kind of software, open source, so other people can use it as well, because we want our practices to become widespread. Is a software that would track the research you do online, not unlike what happens when employee time monitoring software exists, except also giving people access to the sort of qualitative, not just quantitatively measuring how long a person is researching this or interviewing that person or whatever, but allows for people to view that work and qualitatively assess it. So what that would mean is that when you came to a story when you came to an online news story, you would have the option of going behind it and looking at the source material. And importantly, people would be able to rate the quality of that primary research. So even if you didn't go back and see how well researched the story is yourself, you could see what other people think about how well researched it is. And you would have this sort of deeper engagement. And a lot of this we would hope would happen in real time, as a sort of, so that the audience would go for a virtual ride along. The people who were most interested, the people most passionate about the topic, would be able to go for sort of virtual ride along and see how the journalist had arrived at their conclusions, which of course would make them more vulnerable to criticism and picking apart. Because while I'm a complete believer in press freedom, I'm also a believer in press accountability. And the best way to do that isn't through some kind of enforcement mechanism or libel, but to establish just journalistic norms which would make journalists more accountable to their readers and to their subjects and so forth. That's what we're trying to do. And I hope, Mohammed, you can come aboard and help us with something like that real soon.
Right. So I really like the idea that you put forward. I can relate to it from the open source community, where the idea of open source actually started with people wanting to distribute source of their software and not just the executable to have it work with.
It's a similar idea. Yeah, it's a very similar idea. You can just read the story, or you can crack it open and see how it was put together. Which is, as I was saying to Johnny Pinilla, I think Johnny, this was just before we went. I hit the live button. I was saying we put body cameras on police, and this would be the equivalent of doing that for journalists as well. Sort of tracking their work, because they have, a similar level of responsibility to my mind.
Yeah.
So you're
Right.
generally supportive.
Yeah, quite supportive of the idea. Yeah.
Fantastic. Of course, at the moment, Mohammed's involved in Monitor project, helping to develop. I hope I was not supposed to keep that confidential. I should have checked beforehand. Anyhow, which is helping to develop an account of no, you mentioned it before. I'm sorry. I'm just always very careful with stuff about Egypt, not to put people in the firing line if they're doing good work. But a project like that, in a sense, is becoming more and more common, as to get any decent press coverage, the subjects themselves, so to speak, or activist groups have to do all the journalistic work. You need an NGO to chronicle all the Syrian refugees and all the killings in Syria or wherever, and then that information is passed on to journalists who just take it the last 5% of the way across the line and get it published. But if people or causes don't have the resources and don't have networks to sort of do their own PR, they get left behind.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the idea is, of course, we're trying to overcome that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, do you guys have anything else to add, or should we just wrap things up for now?
So are we going to talk about the specifics of the platform, or will that be
Sure,
in another?
sure, I'd love to. There's two. Let me just pull up these the example. Do I still have that? There's a software called ThingLink, which you might be familiar with.
Can you say it again?
ThingLink. Hello?
Hello?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah, no, I don't think I've heard of it.
Okay. Well, see, it's meant as an educational tool. I'm just looking for an example I've made of what we want to do with it. But see, but that would, and it's just a sort of visual. It's a platform that allows you to make sort of visualizations that link to other content, like SoundCloud video or YouTube video, and you can play that back without leaving the page that you're on. And for us, that looked like it would be a useful way to build something which we'd call a right line. And a right line would be a flow chart showing the sequence of work done on a story. You know, you'd start with a pitch or with a note sort of describing what you're setting out to do, and then you would record interviews and web browsing sessions. I was thinking with web browsing sessions, you'd probably want to speed up the video or something to make it less boring to watch, and then be able to slow it down and take notes and stuff. But let me just 1 second look down here. Do you have any ideas about sort of what kind of platforms you think would achieve what we're talking about?
So I can't really imagine the requirements quite well. I want to think about the requirements first, but the kind of, from what you've mentioned so far, I think there's two ways of doing this. Either we find a platform that's some kind of journalistic platform that's already open source that we can customize it to sort of achieve the requirements we want, or we can start sort of from scratch using a sort of bare bones framework, if you wish, and sort of build up our platform, which would be the more flexible kind of way that will achieve the requirements we want. So we have to pick a route depending on the kind of what we want to do exactly.
I see. The one thing that I'm conscious of is that really what I was thinking of is we build a platform from scratch, but what that software would do would be able to pull together other digital resources that already exist online, like be able to use ThingLink, which plugs into WordPress, for example, YouTube, SoundCloud, Pinboard, all these different existing functionalities that are online, and in future be able to incorporate others, right? And it would just sort of pull all those things together for the journalists to so that they're not dealing with 1,000 different accounts. You know, you sort of plug all your important cool has an account on all these different services, and when you're using the Go Gonzo or whatever we end up calling it, these different services are automatically sort of brought together into a final interactive presentation to save on time. And also, so as the journalist is working, they're like a boat moving across a lake, and they're sending out ripples across the internet through social media and through these other services about the work they're doing in the lead up to the story. The way, one way I've thought of putting it is everyone, when they try and build, when they get to trying to make news more innovative in a new way online, they take the idea of the old newspaper or the old TV formats, and they try and build on top of them. That's the opposite of what we want to do. We want to open them up and build behind them, or give people access to what's behind them. And so yeah, so people would have, like, we would, if I was to do an interview on the telephone, that would go on SoundCloud, and then I could do a Google Plus interview like this, and that would go on YouTube. And all the while, these different resource materials are being cataloged and plugged into ThingLink or some other visual system, which then, by the time I finish writing the article, it's sort of automatically done. And the automation is for two reasons. One, because you would reduce the time needed for the journalist to do the work, and two, because it would reduce the journalist's discretion, would make it harder for them to leave out things that they don't want to be included, or to fudge something and make it seem like, if they've got this, like we had a secret interview with confidential sources. Although we do want to have some capacity for redaction of identities and stuff like that, which is more complicated. But you want people to get a sense of how substantial it is, or if they've just been fed a quote, or if they've had a real engagement with someone who knows what's going on. Let me just find this bright line. Okay. I can't find the example that I made previously. But wait a second, I've got a file here in the Dropbox that I can.
Okay. Is it thinklink.com?
ThingLink, yeah. I think that's it. I'm sorry, this is a document I should have had ready before we started.
That's fine. It seems like it's a sort of storage place for where you can import stuff from various other services like Facebook, Flickr, and from your drive. And
yeah,
other
exactly.
links.
And that's so that way, as we're going, we're uploading photographs and video and audio to the websites that already have the biggest audience for that. So we're not, hiding our content away on the outside these. You want to be in the mix in YouTube. You want to be in the mix in SoundCloud to get so people just stumble across the content, and then from there they can be led back to the finished piece, which ties this all together in a sort of more cohesive, thoughtful way.
Okay, I see. So the first part, or we can call it the research part, where you're collecting all the sort of resources for your news in one place, is the first phase where you use a platform to kind of collect all of that material somewhere, whether it's audio or interviews or other articles or whatever. Um, and then you kind of, after you write your story, you kind of link back to the stuff that you've collected, all of these resources.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, you want the two phases to be as integrated as possible, in the sense that as people are going, they're logging the resources they use. And I mean, essentially, it's the idea that for every claim in a digital article, for every claim you make that's even mildly controversial, there should be a link to supporting evidence. And that's what we do if the evidence is already online now. But journalistic practice is if someone told you in a phone call, then you can just sort of take the bit you want from that phone call and include it, rather than including a recording of the entire phone call. When obviously, see, in digital, in print media, in pre-digital media, there was always a space or time constraint, which meant that journalists had an excuse, and in fact a very good reason, to leave out a huge amount of the context. Now the idea is, well, we'll have so for the tip of the iceberg is this published piece that people can consume very quickly, but if they want, they can see the rest of the iceberg beneath. Johnny's is updating his computer or something. He'll be right with us. Hold on a second. Let me find this. Yes, I found it. Now I'm going to use screen share to share this with you. Hold on a sec. Work. Here we go. Now, can you see, this is a story that I've halfway through that I've been working on for about a year about the relationship between robot and human intelligence. My interviewees are probably pissed off that I haven't actually got anything out because I spoke to them like end of last year and so forth. But it's a tricky topic. It takes a bit of concentration to write. And if you see here, I've used ThingLink to make a sort of mock-up of what I would want the write line to be. Right? I pitched the story to the editor. There's nothing that links to yet, but that would link to my idea, or I would pitch it to the Patron community who would vote on it using the engine room. But that's a whole nother discussion, although it does tie in to some extent. And then here are the interviews I've done. And see, I can go and you're seeing this, right?
Yeah, I can see.
Yep. And so people watch, and it's telling us that this meeting is live now for people who want to watch. But the
hello, this is Austin Mackel from Important Cool. I'm speaking to two professors from the Cognitive Science Department of Macquarie University.
You see, and so on. And then up here I've got, what I've done this time is I've organized, so on the right is pre-existing resource material, already published, already online, I just read it and maybe linked to it and used a quote, right? And then on the left, I've got the actual original source material, in this case, Google Plus interviews, which integrate really, really well with this system because you get the interview up immediately. And yeah, I mean, so that's kind of the end goal is something like that being automatically generated by the journalist's work. And so, and one of the things I think that one of the ideas I've had sort of since creating that is that idea that, you know, a web surfing session, if they're doing 5 hours of online research online, that can be recorded and sped up so people can see, you know, what they were doing and there's a list of the URLs visited below, but you can get an idea of where they spent their time and where they were looking without, being as painstaking as going through every second. With the exception that the journalist could make a note while they were doing that, like, I think this is interesting because X, Y. Anyhow, I'm getting probably too much into the specifics, but it's hard to sometimes describe the whole project without describing, specific bits of the interface. So, but you can imagine, like, the right line would indicate whether someone was working at their desk, but also that, they should take their camera phone out, and if there's an event that they're observing, they should get some kind of video record. They should record audio, multiple copies of it, of interviews. One thing would be, of course, I mentioned before, the issues of confidentiality when you have to protect a source or something like that. One solution that I came up with for that so far, or that we've come up with collectively, is to have a policy on redactions, a very clear policy on what kind of thing can be redacted and in what circumstances, and have that published online. Then have some kind of audit done by a separate group. Reporters, Electronic Frontiers Foundation, Reporters Without Borders, some separate credible organization can come in and review what we have redacted and confirm that it is in fact of the nature that we've said it is when it's redacted, without saying, yes, this, without giving away dangerous information that could put people at risk, the journalists or their sources. So this is one of the more sophisticated things we'll get to later, but we also want the main thing that we do to be sort of public investigations, where the journalist sort of is conducting the investigation, tweeting their work as they go, and then has all that to help build interest in the story as well. And there's actually great content that's created a lot of the time. For example, now let me give you here we go, Emma Gonzo. I'll do another screen share. This is a documentary we did, right? And this is more of the kind of the concept. Now,
I can see it.
Now you should be able to. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the original video. It's a documentary. It's a video format, this one. This is me and Christian traveling. It's 20 minutes. It's still pretty long, right? But here we go. We've got down the bottom way more video content. Now that might seem silly to because hardly anyone's going to watch. For example, this is 8 hours or something sorry, 4 hours. 4 hours of Christian and I at the ceremony, taking ayahuasca, talking to the shaman and each other and so forth, right? And here we've got the full interviews that we've selected clips from, and that might not be something that many people will look at, but someone who's, I beg your pardon, that's now my Facebook, but someone else who's interested in the topic may want to go back and review, like someone else who's a journalist working on the topic, or someone who thinks we viciously misrepresented this town that we visited. We made out like they're all drug fiends and really they're good Christians, and they don't, and most people don't take this. They can go and look at what we decided not to include, who we didn't speak to, how we framed questions, which bits we edited out, and stuff like that. It makes, as I said, it makes us more vulnerable to scrutiny. And that's not particularly important with this little travelogue documentary that we did, but the idea of if you can bring this practice in across the board, you're going to force up standards across the board, or make people who don't use these procedures be taken less seriously. Anyhow, I've probably ranted at you enough for one day, haven't I?
No, I'm really enjoying this.
So I'm sorry, I'm not sure where you physically are in the world right now, Mohammed.
I'm in the United Kingdom.
Okay, you're in London. Okay, awesome. That's although it's a place that anyhow, we won't get into the politics of the UK. it's interesting at the moment, at least with Corbyn coming in and things being a little bit shaken up like that.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
And you've been doing open source stuff for a few years, or?
Yeah, for about a year now. Like, I got into it for about a year, but I've been interested in it for a while. But I was still learning lots of stuff. I'm learning every day. But yeah, I'm more involved now than probably last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
Well, there's this whole philosophy that goes along with open source of sort of the sharing economy, a post-scarcity kind of approach to things, where because in a digital space, information in particular isn't divisible. It doesn't. You don't get less of it when you share it. You get more of it when you share it, which is kind of a weird trick. Which is part of what we're trying to pull off here. There's a whole other side to it where we originally wanted to set up as a worker-owned co-op or some kind of partnership where all the journalists were equal owners. That's how it functions basically, but our legal structure is an NGO because we couldn't find a way to legally formulate a co-op with people in different parts, with people all over like outside the country. That we're in. So we could find a way with the NGO to do that. But the idea is as well, of course, at as many levels as possible. The journalists will elect their editors, and the patrons, people who donate either money or a social media account, will vote on which stories get the budget each month, which stories are actually funded. And part of how they'll be costed, how those stories will be costed, will be like a per word rate and then also per hour rate for the research. But then people need to be able to go back and check that you are actually, researching that whole time, not just watching YouTube videos about an irrelevant topic, and then charging everyone for it. So, you can see how those two parts would sort of fit together.
Yeah, I can.
But at the moment, there's no money to divide up in the monthly. Well, there's no money going into a monthly editorial budget because we'd be broke in a month if we did that. Just covering hosting costs and stuff. So there's nothing for the patrons to vote on. So the priority is the journalistic transparency software, not the democratic budget software. But the two things would interlock, and ideally once they're both complete. But even just having the transparency software does allow for greater sort of reader participation, because it's going to allow for those who are most interested to go in and grade the quality of the research behind the story. I was thinking that you'd do that with two variables. You would grade the quality of each artifact, and then you would grade how much fidelity you think the journalist has shown to their research in the final story, or whether they've done stuff in their research, found information they didn't want, and then just left it out of the final story to suit their agenda, so to speak.
Okay, so you rate each artifact and you rate the final article. That what you mean?
Well, you wouldn't write the artifacts. Most of the artifacts wouldn't be written. They wouldn't. It would be. So there would be interviews, they would be evidentiary photographs, like photographs which prove an event took place or something like that. But but then you can still, you'd have, so it's like you would have a report at the like, you would have your text section of the story to simplify things. It's going to be different formats and so forth. You have a text story which sums everything up, but for every point you make on that, you have every point of that could be even mildly contentious. You have some kind of evidence to back it up. That might be a spreadsheet. It might be an interview. It might be a photograph. It might be an audio recording. It may be a text document. So it could be an email exchange, right? And you would be logging these as you collected them. And that would sort of lay out over your progress over time on this story. and that would be then there to check up on. Take the example of Egypt. People would come and they would see one of the stories from one of the many reporters who was sort of hysterically against the Muslim Brotherhood, and then they would click through and they would see, well, they didn't even speak to anyone from the Muslim Brotherhood here. They never got their perspective, and what would happen is by the whole point of surveillance, right, is that people behave better. It's not just to be able to catch people out after the fact, is that they behave better knowing that they're being surveilled, knowing that they're going to be able to, they have to sort of account for themselves. They behave better in the first place. And so they would go, and I mean, a lot of the time the people in Egypt who were writing these stories honestly didn't know what the Brotherhood's perspective was, didn't know I'm using that example because you and I both have a strong knowledge of it.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of other cases. And of course, you see, if it's an open source thing that anyone can use, then there's no excuse for people not to use it. And you'll see the better journalists who do legwork and do research wanting to use it so they can show why people should listen to them. Because at the moment, a lot of people, they get it so much of a conflation of news and opinion, which is, this news and commentary are not as neatly delineated, which is, I'm not sure you want to go back to the old approach of trying to have the objective news, because everyone has a subjective point of view. The idea is that if you you give the reader the best possible chance of understanding what your subjective point of view and what your ideology is that you're bringing to the story, so they can then they can receive it in a more intelligent way, and they can be, and if they see the work that you put into it, they'll know how seriously to take it.
Yeah, sure. Definitely.
We would, if you were to continue with this idea, we would want you ideally. I mean, it's your call, but we'd want you to join the association, and then you'd get a vote in all the major decisions and so forth like that. We don't want to take work from people. We have what we call a no one night stands policy. We don't really want to we don't accept one off stories, for example. People have to want to join the group and contribute on a regular basis. One reason for that is there's the other side of things is that as journalists, people were sick of how disposable and replaceable they were. There's so many. At the moment, right? If a journalist and an editor disagree about something, or it's so easy for the editor to find a new journalist who will agree with them, that also limits the amount of debate. So we figure by making it possible for the editor to sort of shop around too much, making them have to work with the journalists who are members of the association, we increase the journalists' leverage and sort of level the playing field a little bit. More horizontal, cooperative structures, less top down.
Yeah. Okay, I think. Do you have any sort of time scale for this thing when you want it to be out?
Well, ideally, I'd like to go back in time to before the coup in Egypt and.
Oh.
No, I mean, we wanted to do this. We've been wanting to do this for like a year or more. We've had basically the same idea, and what's happened is when I got the idea, I talked to other journalists that I knew, and people got excited and came on board. And next thing you know, we've got lots of journalists on the team who want to participate, but no one to do the technical side. So we kind of launched using just the functionalities of WordPress and YouTube, making, as I said before, these gestures towards the final goal. But that's been good because it's given us more. My thinking was no, let's stay until we find the right people to do the technical side of stuff first, but then we would probably wouldn't have felt like, for example, had a conversation with you if we hadn't been out there publishing stuff and sort of getting on everyone's radar. So it's this thing where we don't have the money and the resources and to build. So we can't put what we want out there and get all the attention we need, and we need attention to get the resources, and to get the resources we need attention. So we've kind of got to just put one foot in front of the other and keep going and keep bumbling our way through it towards, what is at least a fairly coherent goal at the end.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up for there for now, and we'll talk again soon, huh?
Okay, yeah, sure.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye.